Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here in the atrium at City Hall. As many of you know, it was not long ago that we all woke up to a great shock, which was that in a sleepy street in Midtown Harrisburg, an ISIS sympathizer was arrested. That night at the Hadi Mosque in uptown Harrisburg, I talked about the importance of recognizing that we can't condemn an entire religious group for the actions of one radicalized individual. I want to repeat that message again today and say as well that I was overwhelmed and personally moved by the outpouring of sentiment by the Muslim community here in Harrisburg, pro-peace, pro-American sentiment, and a desire to work together to make sure that that type of radicalization doesn't occur. The Chief Carter and I had a good conversation with Senator Casey here this morning about ways in which the federal government can help local municipalities like Harrisburg deal with issues of national security and threats to the public safety. And we wanted to brief you a little bit this morning. It's my privilege to welcome Senator Casey back to City Hall. As he reminded me, it's only been a couple years since I was elected, but we've met regularly and repeatedly, and Senator Casey has consistently fought for the interests of Harrisburg and this community, whether it's fighting for funding for the victims of the 14th Street sinkhole or pushing for a new federal courthouse here in Harrisburg. Senator Casey has been with the city just as he has been with the working people of Pennsylvania, pushing for education and other investment in our cities. I'd like to welcome Senator Casey, and after he gives a few remarks, we will take some questions.
Mayor,
Senator,
thank you. Thanks
good
very
to see
much.
you.
Well, Mayor, thank you very much. I want to thank you for your good work. As mayor, it's a tough job. I've always said, as a legislator, I think I'm allowed to say that executives on a regular basis probably have a tougher job than legislators. I'm allowed to do that. Chief, thank you for being with us today and for the briefing that I received from both the mayor and the chief. The main purpose for my visit today is to, in a real sense, to remind folks about how important it is that the federal government works closely with local government and local law enforcement to deal with the threat and the reality of terrorism. As the mayor said, we had a reminder not too long ago here in Harrisburg about what can be happening sometimes in our midst. We got an even more jarring reminder some weeks later in Harrisburg. We had an individual shooting at a police officer as he's charging the patrol car, and thankfully that officer, Officer Hartnett in Philadelphia, not only was not fatally wounded or taken down, he was hit on the side of his several times in his shoulder, but was able to get out of the car and pursue the assailant when this individual ran out of ammunition. But that very well could have been a horrific tragedy, a death of a law enforcement officer. So this challenge we face is not a challenge that Washington itself can deal with. Washington has to work in close partnership with folks at the local level. And I want to reiterate and to remind folks that a lot of the best work done on Homeland Security is done right here in a city like Harrisburg or cities across our Commonwealth in our country. What my job is, and what the job is of every Democrat, every Republican in the House and the Senate, as well as those in the administration, is to work with and support local law enforcement. So you can't just talk tough on getting the bad guys and not support the cops hiring program. Give you one example of how off course Washington can be. Last year, the U.S. House of Representatives on the Republican side voted to eliminate the cops hiring program. That's a really bad idea. We should never, no party, no Congress should ever do that again. If anything, we should be adding dollars to the COPS program. Now, thankfully, the COPS hiring program is still in existence, number one, and number two, has about $187 million of appropriations this year. That's good, but not nearly good enough. I would argue we need a lot more dollars for the cops hiring program, more dollars for the bulletproof vest program. Imagine that. We have a program that can provide bulletproof vests for police officers, and you got some people in Washington don't want to fund it. That's a bad idea. We need to get more money into the bulletproof vest program and fund it. We should fund fully, and we're nowhere near funding fully, the so-called Burn Justice Assistance Grants, so-called JAG grants. That number this year is a little less than $500 million, but for the whole country, that's not enough, just as it's not enough to fund the COPS program at $187 million. So they're just a couple of examples of where Washington can help directly on funding programs that everyone knows works. No one is disputing that the COPS program or the VEST program or the Justice Assistant Grant program are worthy programs. We have to get more folks in Washington recognizing that that's the best way to help. Give you something else along these lines. You have the administration with a new task force. Everything has an acronym, but this is one of them. The Countering Violent Extremism Task Force, CVE. That's good. It's good that the administration has a task force that they have created within the Department of Justice, within the federal government. But we have to do more than that. One of the best bills in the Senate right now is Senator Carper. Senator Carper from Delaware is the top Democrat on the Homeland Security Committee. He has a community partnerships bill which basically says that an existing effort within the administration to support grants to local communities to work on this problem long before, hopefully, long before someone is radicalized. Working at the community level with people who are expert at making sure that we're taking steps in advance to prevent folks from going down the path to be involved in violent extremism. This is a good idea that's part of that's already existing in the Department of Homeland Security. What Senator Carper's bill would do that I support would be to legislate or codify that existing community partnerships effort so that we can work more closely with local government. So this isn't simply having the federal government increase funding, as I think it should, for law enforcement programs. That's essential. But it's also about newer approaches to making sure we're putting in place preventative steps. We've got a lot of expertise at the local level with regard to law enforcement. We also have a lot of expertise at the local level where communities know how best to thwart a plot, but even how best to prevent someone from becoming radicalized at the very outset. This is not simply a law enforcement challenge. All of us have to be part of the solution. The faith community has a lot to offer on this, and we're seeing in communities across the country, the faith community, the business community, the law enforcement folks, all coming together, the education community, the schools, who know what's happening, in the lives of their residents, and are figuring out ways to prevent folks from taking this path which leads to violent extremism. So we've got a ways to go. My point is that the federal government has to do more to validate the important role that local law enforcement plays and to work more closely with not only local law enforcement, but community groups as well. We know how to do this. We've got a lot of people who understand how to stop this from growing, but the federal government cannot expect to do this alone, and we cannot just do this from Washington. We got to work with and rely upon great expertise at the local level, and that goes for working with folks like the mayor and the chief who know how to do this. And this is everybody's problem. State and local government is part of the solution, and so is the federal government. So look forward to working with, continue to work with, I should say, both the mayor and the chief. I've asked as well Homeland Security Secretary Johnson to come to Pennsylvania to learn what's happening here at the local level and to work with us even more closely than he is now. So, Mayor, thank you very much, and I don't know if we can take questions or
let's do it. Let's take some questions from the media. Yes, sir.
Senator Casey, you just went into a lengthy discussion, but what specifically, I guess, are you, for the federal government, bringing to Harrisburg? You talked about relationships, but is it more funding? Is there a number figure? Are you trying to better equip the city police department?
Well, one of the reasons to spend some time with the mayor and the chief is to get their assessment of ways that we can be helpful. The COPS program, for example, this year will result in Harrisburg five new officers. That's progress. That's good, but I would argue if we had a better funded COPS program, cities like Harrisburg would be able to hire more police officers than 5. I'm glad 5 will be part of this year's federal government contribution, but we need to do more. One of the biggest areas that the chief knows better than I is more help for training. One of the most important parts of any law enforcement, but especially law enforcement in the context of terrorism or the threat of terrorism, is training. You can't be fully prepared for these kinds of either an attack or something that's a prelude to an attack if you don't have the dollars for training. Local law enforcement doesn't have a lot of extra dollars for training. The federal government should help. And all those guys in Washington that talk tough and criticize the president, criticize agencies, they're good at criticizing and finger pointing, but it's not good enough to talk tough. You got to vote for funding and vote and support programs that we know work. So I'm tired of the tough talk from politicians in Washington. It's time to vote and support local law enforcement. And if you vote to eliminate the COPS program, you're not very tough. You're not very tough on the bad guys if you vote to eliminate the COPS program, as the House Republicans did recently. That's a bad result. That helps the bad guys when you eliminate that kind of a program.
Where's the funding coming from?
Funding comes from the federal government, from the appropriations process.
Okay, but I guess are you trying to pull it from another fund to put more into this fund?
I'm open to any idea. If it means taking it from somewhere else, I'll listen to that. But if it means we have to get more revenue, I'm going to support more revenue. This is something that if we're going to take this problem seriously, we're going to have people that stand up and show the courage to vote for more funding. For the COPS program, for the Bulletproof Vest program, for the Burn Grant program, for the Community Partnerships program, and I'm sure we could list some others as well.
Senator, I don't think anybody would disagree that more cops on the street, especially here in Harrisburg, is a good thing.
Well, apparently somebody in Washington does, but they keep voting against funding, okay? That's the point I'm trying to make.
And I'm just wondering, although they can improve the relationships with the community and be knowledgeable in more religious outlets, as you said, but how can they stop a guy in his basement with a computer?
Well, that part of it involves coordination and cooperation between and among levels of government and different levels of law enforcement. In this case, it worked. The FBI worked very closely with state and local law enforcement, and all those levels of government should be commended for how it worked. We have to make sure it works every time. And the best way to do that is to figure out more and better ways to share information. That's why I talked about this community partnership program, because that is long before, or the efforts there, I should say, are long before you have a problem, to prevent young people or to persuade them not to go down the path of violent extremism. And that's why we have to do as much prevention funding as we do the more traditional law enforcement funding. The good news is, I think, on that is we have technology that can track some of these messages where it's clear that someone's trying to become violent or becoming radicalized. So we have good technology, but we have to continue to make sure that information is shared between different levels of government.
Could there be a specified officer who's coordinating with the feds who are doing the major investigation? I'm just
Yeah.
concrete?
I mean, unless I'd listen to the chief and the mayor about how best to do that. The good news is after 9/11, with a department of government like Homeland Security, you do have at the federal level, and then even at the state level, you have folks that are doing Homeland Security. So in essence, we've created a point person or a group of point persons to track just this issue, which is the Homeland Security challenge.
Senator Casey, you could have made this point about more funding in any number of Pennsylvania communities. Why did you choose to come to Harrisburg? What is different about Harrisburg than other communities?
Well, two reasons. Number one is this is only our second. The first stop we did on this was in Philadelphia. In both cases have had major recent incidents. But look, this applies to, and I should take the same message to a very small community in some part of our state or big cities. We'll be in Pittsburgh, I hope, I don't know when that is, next week, I think. We're going to try to bring it to as many places as we can. Because look, I'll just be blunt about this part of it. If a lot of folks out there who pay taxes every day think that this is a challenge, and they know it's a challenge, that Washington only is going to work on and have responsibility for, I'm not sure they're going to be that confident the problem will get solved. I think they have a lot more confidence when they see folks who are experts at law enforcement working on this with us. Our job is just to make sure they have the resources they need.
Senator Casey, over the past year, President Obama has made it very clear that he's trying to demilitarize police departments on a local level across the country. So how do you balance his initiatives with trying to give more equipment for local police departments trying to battle terror threats?
Well, I think we can do local law enforcement a big favor by just making sure that they have the resources for these programs that we know work. I think.
What type of resources?
Well, the ones I just talked about, whether that's dollars for hiring more police officers, whether that's dollars for the Bulletproof Vest program. I'll give you an example. The Bulletproof Vest program a couple of years ago was cut from $30 million to $24 million. Now, what did the American people get for cutting that program by $6 million? I think we became a lot less safe, okay? Or at least our officers became less safe. So whether it's protection or whether it's dollars for hiring or whether it's dollars. Now, training, I think, is a whole new, an area where we need to focus a lot, a whole new initiative on. Not sure quite how to do that. But I know there's a debate about kind of an equipment case about whether law enforcement should have equipment that looks more like a military, kind of more like a military force, and that's a debate that we'll have. But
what do you believe? Do you believe local police departments should have tanks and things like that to fight terror?
I will listen to what local law enforcement tells me about that. I'm not going to listen to Washington, congressional politicians who think they know better than folks at the local level.
Senator, recently, or you just talked about the expertise of law enforcement here among the Commonwealth.
Right.
Our TV station, ABC 27, recently broke a story about a cheating scandal at the State Police Academy. Given your relationship with the State Police, what is your take on that?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the facts of that case. I don't.
The State Police have confirmed they're doing an internal investigation into an alleged cheating scandal of the current 144th Cadet class passing down tests. Is that some behavior you condone? Or?
No, I don't condone that behavior. But I'm a federal. I'm a member of Congress at the federal level. I don't vote on issues that relate to the Pennsylvania State Police. But if there's a problem there.
Well, you just talked about the expertise of
let me just finish. If there's a problem there and they are dealing with the problem, those individuals have to be held accountable, for sure.
Then last night, North Korea, I guess it came out that they successfully launched a satellite that even went over the Super Bowl game last night. So what's that impact? North Korea's terror threat, how that plays into Homeland security?
Look, it's a, I wouldn't refer to it as a terror threat. I'd refer to it as a proliferation problem, and a regime which has violated international law with impunity for a long time. What we should do, and I think the administration has already gone down this path, number one is to condemn it in the strongest possible terms, and fortunately the Security Council, the world in essence, has condemned it. Secondly, to impose sanctions or to amplify or increase the existing sanctions, because they're serial violators of almost every Security Council resolution that applies to them. And then thirdly, to develop, if we can, newer sanctions or different ways to put more pressure on the regime. And this is not just a problem for the United States. We have to work with members of the Security Council to prevent this rogue regime from threatening the world. This was a provocative act, and we have to respond to it.
So you have time for one final question.
You mentioned Washington politicians, and you don't want Washington politicians to tell local communities what's bad. Are there, and those that have blocked funding in the past, are there specific members of the Pennsylvania congressional delegation that you feel have acted in either of those ways?
Well, I'm not going to say broadly that this member of Congress did this or that. You have access to all their voting records, but I don't know how you say you're trying to help local law enforcement when you vote to eliminate, not to reduce funding, eliminate the cops hiring program. I just, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But look, voters can, taxpayers who vote and have access to these voting records can look and see how people are voting. But I think that's one of the questions they should ask before, before they vote is, how have you voted on programs that are going to help local law enforcement? I think it might be not the only issue they vote on, but I think it's a pretty important issue.
On this discussion,
Yeah.
Chief Carter, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say one thing about that. I want to reiterate that the entire growth in the Harrisburg Police Department for this coming year is based entirely upon the receipt of that COPS grant. If we didn't have that, we would not be able to grow our department, and we would not be able to provide an adequate level of public safety. I mean, that's one of the things that we're reinforcing here today. Why Harrisburg? Harrisburg is an example, happily, of the receipt of that funding, and we can't do without that funding. Same with the Burns grant, which Harrisburg has received. Same with the example of the recent arrest of the ISIS sympathizer. That is an example of communication working. And Chief Carter can address this, but in Harrisburg, we have had the proper flow of information from the FBI on down to local officials, leading in precisely what you said is hard to stop, which is arresting somebody in their basement, and we did that successfully. So I think there's a lot to point to in Harrisburg that is working well, and at the same time, we've made some serious requests that I'm sure Senator Casey will take under advisement and take back to Washington about the need for additional dollars for funding. And I think that's one of the main issues that we'd like to see addressed as we sort of work together for the future. Chief, you want to take some questions?
Mayor, do you have an exact figure on a dollar amount that you're requesting?
For funding?
Yeah.
No specific dollar amount, just a commitment to recognize that we don't have the resources to provide that adequate level of training, and we'd like to see it. We know the federal government could provide it, and it doesn't even have to be a dollar amount if it can be the actual training itself.
I guess my question is,
Yeah.
what are you asking for? What do you need specifically to, in your mind, get to a level where the police department can better protect its citizens?
Things such as active shooter training, and let me let Chief Carter talk about that. Okay.
So where could more money help your department protect the citizens in a terror situation or prevent it?
I want to start by saying thank you, Senator Casey. It's an honor meeting you. It's an honor having a real conversation with you and your staff, and it's an honor to know that we have a voice down at Washington, D.C., someone who really cares, who really understands, that is going to bat for us. I thank you for that, sir. Thank you. What's your question, ma'am?
Training.
As you know, everything starts with the funding factor. We were fortunate enough to be able to stop a situation that could have really been bad. There are certain things that I cannot say up here about our cooperation with the federal government. I will not say that up here because it's not proper for me to do. But we need more funding to put more police officers out there. We need more funding, for training, for active shooter training. We need more funding because as terrorists, they're into computers to technology. We need that training. We need that nexus with the federal government, with Homeland Security, so that we can best serve our citizens better. This problem will not just disappear overnight. We don't know how many other people are out there, if any, but I guarantee that if they can reach someone like him, they can reach other people. So the threat is real. Not only with that kind of terrorism, even with domestic terrorism, with these guys that are running around shooting up neighborhoods and what have you. The senator talked about that we need bulletproof vests, and they basically cut that program out. Harrisburg, like every other city in this here country, we don't have the funds, we don't have that there purse string to just go out and to do a lot of training or to buy vests. So we do depend on the federal government to help us out. We have some people down there that don't want to hear that. They don't want to help out. They just believe that every city or township should take care of their own problem, and we don't have the finances like that.
Chief, do you have officers right now that do not have vests?
Every officer has a vest. Every officer, but vests are only good for 5 to 7 years, depending on your body chemistry. Your sweat breaks down the cav art and everything else. And so I would like to put our officers in new vests every 4 years, because I don't know how good it's going to be the following year. I don't know what's going to happen, but them having the latest technology, the best of everything, they're protected because they're out there protecting and serving us.
You have about 65 officers that are out on the streets of the 143 or so in the entire complement. How many of those officers have vests that are in that 5 to 7 year range, that ballpark figure?
I don't know.
Is it a lot though? Majority are somewhat expired?
I don't know. I couldn't give you an honest answer.
Do you actually believe that you might have an officer that is dedicated to doing computer searches for people who are tweeting things out of Harrisburg?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you have an officer doing that at this point, or is that potential?
We have a partnership with the FBI right now. I can't get into it, but we do have that.
I mean, social media has become a game changer for you guys, hasn't it? So talk about that.
What do you mean?
Well, tweeting and social media, I mean, the way the criminals are working out there, it's a different environment now.
They're working smarter, sir. We're not dealing with the same criminal. They're smarter. They're younger now. Their technical skills are just outrageous. So we have to be able to keep up with that trend, because crime and criminals change every day. And if we're left behind because we don't have the proper funding, the proper know-how, then we're leaving our citizens out there naked.